everyone. Can you see me and hear me okay? If you can just let me know in the chat box that you can see me. Okay, welcome, good morning. I hope everyone is well. Welcome back for those of you who have been in my previous workshops, and for those of you who don't know me here, my name is Mimi, and yeah, today we will be talking about camera settings. So just to clarify, this is a photography workshop, so any recruitment queries I unfortunately will not be able to answer. There are a few of you on here today, so yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a really short presentation and then open it up for a Q&A, basically. So yeah, let's get started. So again, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about camera settings. So as always, as most of you know, there's a million different ways of photographing a million different things. So I have tried to simplify it as much as possible. Now, the settings that we're going to be talking about, obviously we can delve into other settings, but the settings that I'm going to be talking about here are 3 simple settings that are a requirement rather than sort of a suggestion that other settings might be. Other settings aside from these 3 things are a suggestion, but these 3 things are kind of written in stone requirement, if that makes sense. So we'll start with the ISO. Some people will obviously try to boost the ISO as much as possible to get as much light, especially in darker places. The ISO can be really, really helpful for that. However, our maximum ISO that we accept is 400. Generally speaking, you will never need to go down to 100. It's just not necessary. So anywhere between 200 and 400 is what you should be setting your ISO at. Now, I personally recommend to just fix your ISO at 400 for the whole shoot. But having said that, you are going to need to lower it in certain situations. For example, I don't know, on a really, really, really sunny day, like it is here today, actually. On a really sunny day, for example, you might need to lower it to 200 to avoid sort of overexposure. So yeah, so that's something to keep in mind, but generally speaking, I would just fix it at 400. If you are using, you should be using a tripod and a flash, so those are also requirements. So if you are using a tripod or flash, some people sort of get a bit nervous about not going over 400. So again, but if you are using those things, 400 is absolutely fine. Okay, so the next thing is the f-stop. So a lot of people will, generally the larger the number, the less light that comes in, but what we see, or what I see, is I don't tend to see larger f-stops. I tend to see lower ones. So this is the aperture that we recommend. There's a bit of debate about, crop frame and full frame on this, but generally speaking, it should be between a 7.1 and 11. So you can set your camera to aperture priority and just make sure that you're shooting in between that range. So anything lower than 7.1 is sort of going into the realm of really blurry depth of field, and we don't want that. So we want everything to be sort of in focus properly. And then the last thing is the focal length. So this is a worldwide industry standard. It's not just something from Focal, it's something from sort of property photography worldwide. For a full frame camera, we require a 16mm lens or a focal length, and for a crop frame camera, it's 10mm. So this can vary in range. So just to sort of simplify the crop factor. Most crop frame cameras will be a crop factor of 1.6, which is why the focal length for crop frame is at 10 millimeters, because 10 times 1.6 is 16. So what we're looking for is actually a 35 millimeter focal length of 16 millimeters. So you should see that really easily in the metadata. You'll see 35 millimeter focal length separate to what your camera focal length is, and it should equate to 16 millimeters. We're quite strict on that. Having said that, though, we do have some leeway. So we can go for a full frame camera, we can go all the way up to 18 millimeters, and we can also go all the way down to 14 millimeters. For anything lower than 14 millimeters, we cannot accept. Anything higher than 18 millimeters, we also cannot accept. But anything between that range is fine. Ideally, the sweet spot is 16 millimeters, though. So if your camera provides that, please do have it on 16 millimeters. If your lens starts at 17 millimeters and you have a full frame, that's absolutely fine. 17 millimeters will be acceptable. For the cropped frame, because it's a bit more complicated with the 35 millimeter focal length ratio, for the crop frame there's a bit less leeway, so probably about, depending on what the crop factor is with your crop frame, again most of them are 1.6, but for a crop frame we can generally go 1 millimeter either side, so we can go anywhere from 9 millimeters to 11 millimeters, and that will generally equate to about 17 or 18 millimeters, the 35 millimeter focal length, or anywhere from 14 to 15. So again, just to summarize this really simply, for full frame anywhere from 14 to 18 millimeters, and for crop frame anywhere from 9 to 11 millimeters. Okay, so just to go on the back of that and show you why we use 16 millimeters. This is 16 millimeters on a full frame camera. So we have a nice view of the space. It's obviously a wide angle lens, but minimal distortion here, and it's showing the space quite nicely. So here we're using the same lens, but we've adjusted it to 24 millimeters. So a lot of you, I'm sure, are aware that a lot of lenses start at 24. That's why I've done this at 24 here, but yeah, so this is 24 millimeters. You can obviously see you're not really getting the space properly. I mean, still a really nice photo, still showing the space, but it's just not the same. Let's just go back to this one. See, this one you can really see how large it is, whereas this one you can't really tell. It actually looks a lot smaller. And just to give you guys some sort of background, a lot of the escalations and things that come from the clients with people who aren't using the 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter focal length is that the room does not look as big as it is. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. So here we have a side-by-side, really simple. The 24 millimeter is just not showing us the entire space, which is why we need the 16 millimeter. It gives a much better idea of the space, which is what the whole purpose of property photography really is. So yeah. Okay, so just to summarize these three things, these three takeaways, we'll talk about other things in a moment, but really simply, ISO at 200 to 400, aperture between 7.1 and 11, and 16 millimeters on a full frame and 10 millimeters on a cropped frame. Okay, cool. So I shall open it up to questions. Give me a second to come back to you guys. Great, hello. So hopefully that all made sense for you. 24 meters on a full frame, is it good enough? No, hopefully I've answered that question for you. We cannot accept 24 millimeters, unfortunately. Can I use a 15 millimeter So that doesn't cause any distortion. So the 15 millimeter will completely depend on whether you have a full frame camera or crop frame camera. If you have a full frame camera, 15 millimeters is fine. We can go all the way down to 14. But if you have a crop frame camera, 15 millimeters is not wide enough. My Canon shoots JPEG 72 DPI. Is this acceptable? Yes, it is. The DPI we're not too concerned about. The file sizes that you upload need to be anywhere between 3 and 8 megabytes. Okay, I will be using 10 to 20 millimeter. What millimeter would be acceptable using this lens? So it just completely depends if your camera is, you said FX camera, I don't know what that means. So it just depends if your camera is full frame or crop frame. On Nikon cameras, FX means full frame, sorry. Yeah, right, okay. So I use a full frame camera. On Nikon's camera, FX means full frame, GX means crop sensor with a crop of 1.5. Canon is 1.6. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's good to know. So if it is a 1.5 crop factor, then that needs to be taken into account. So if you're using a 10 millimeter lens on a crop frame camera that has a crop factor of 1.5, then that would equate to a 15 millimeter lens, which is still completely acceptable. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I'm a Canon person. I used to be Nikon, but I haven't used it in a long time. So yeah, thank you for clarifying. 16 millimeter on a full frame is nearly fisheye. Is that okay? No, it's not nearly fisheye. It's definitely wide. And causes a bit of distortion, but we're trying to go not as far as causing too much distortion, so it's not nearly a fisheye. I can't remember what the millimeters for fisheye is, but it's a lot wider. It's a lot wider. So yeah, 15 is fine. Or sorry, 16 is fine. Do you have a limit of megapixels? Is 12 megapixels camera sufficient? We don't have a limit on megapixels. It just needs to be a DSLR or a mirrorless, basically. So yeah. Do you recommend the same camera settings for 360 pictures? So for 360, you'll be using a Ricoh. You don't need to touch any settings at all. It's all automatic. Do you have a recommended pixel dimension and JPEG compression number for submitting images? So again, as long as it's 3 to 8 megabytes, that's what we accept. In your camera, it should be a small JPEG. I know it is in mine, but yeah, play around with the file size on that. But for mine, it's a small JPEG. So is 12 millimeters on a Sony a6000 okay? I don't know whether the Sony a6000 is full frame or crop frame, so it completely depends on that. I have a Canon 70D with a 10 to 18 mil lens. I know you have been extremely clear on the requirements, but will this create positive enough results? Again, I'm not sure if this 70D is full frame or crop frame. But actually your lens will provide both. So yeah, so if it's crop frame, please leave it at 10 millimeters. And if the Canon 70D is full frame, please leave it at 16. Do you look at the histogram? Does it have to be perfect? So no, we don't look at the histogram. That will completely depend on you and how you photograph and how you use the histogram, but we don't look at it. Hi, I'm not understanding what you're saying about the lens. My lens is 18 millimeters to 55. Do I turn it to 35 millimeter to get 16? No, so if you have a full frame camera, then you will need to go to the absolute lowest focal length, which is 18 millimeters. The 35 millimeter focal length, you can Google this, there's tons of information on it, but full frame cameras are the equivalent to a 35 millimeter camera. So yeah, if that makes sense. So the 35 millimeter range needs to be 16 millimeters. So if you have a full frame camera, you need to get it as close to 16 as you can. So 18 is just borderline acceptable. If you have a crop frame camera, then 18 to 55 is not going to be good. Do you have a standard crop shape? Because the 16 millimeter example looks like it is not the shape out of the camera. No, we don't have a standard crop. The ratio preferably is 4:3, but we're not looking, we're not concerned about the aspect ratio too much. So yeah, and that image from the image that I showed you of the 16 millimeter is straight from the crop of the camera. Why do you need to be shooting 4:3 rather than 3:2 on camera? It's just a nicer aspect ratio, basically. Gives a better view of the room. Is some distortion acceptable? Really good question. So obviously we're working with a wide angle lens. Distortion will always be apparent on wide angle lenses. There's nothing we can do to prevent that. That's just the way that's why wide angle lenses are the way that they are. So yes, some distortion is acceptable. It's unavoidable. So yeah. Which is better, manual focus or autofocus? So I would always suggest leaving everything on manual, including your flash. It's really important that as the photographer you have control over everything. Having said that, you know, it just depends on you, depends on how you work. But yeah, I would say manual. Can we use photo merge? I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you clarify that for me, that would be really great. Thank you. Okay, so I think this was your reply to the photo merge. You're saying taking the picture with a 24 millimeter with different image and stitch together. I still don't really know what you mean by that, but you shouldn't be stitching anything together. So yeah. You definitely should not be editing or stitching anything together. Hopefully that answers the question. I think I understood it right. Okay, do you recommend to do auto white balance? In short, no. Your white balance is going to change from room to room, property to property, even image to image, even in the same room. So you really have to just adjust your white balance as you go. Yeah, for really tungsten, really tungsten lit property, I probably adjust it to that. So again, we don't really have a recommendation on white balance. It's just completely up to you. So you just have to adjust it as you go, basically. My camera's smallest JPEG is 8.1 megabytes. Is that acceptable, or should I resize in Lightroom? Craig, our portal literally does not accept anything over 8 megabytes, so it will reject it, unfortunately. So yeah, the reason we've done that is because sort of the amount of files that are coming through. So unfortunately it won't accept the 8.1. I'm really curious as to why the smallest JPEG on your camera is 8.1 though. Seems a bit, yeah, seems large. So if that is the case, then you will need to convert it to smaller. Okay, this is a really good question. We get this quite a lot. So should all images be landscape, even in narrow rooms, like a separate toilet? Yes, so we only accept landscape images. We do not accept any portrait images at all. I completely understand that you might be really tempted to go portrait, especially in, bathrooms, toilets are typically the notoriously most difficult rooms to photograph. But if that's the case and you're trying to go portrait, first of all, the client will not accept portrait images, so we can only shoot landscape. But secondly, you might be having to sacrifice something in the toilet, or I don't know, depending on what the toilet is. But yeah, definitely just landscape. You just have to do the best you can with landscape, I'm afraid. Should you always carry a spare camera body? I always did at weddings. Is this something focal agent recommend? If you want to, yeah, go ahead. I don't actually know too many photographers, to be totally honest, who have more than one camera body. Weddings are the reason why it would have been more essential or crucial to do at weddings is because weddings is once in a lifetime, well, for some people, but it's once in a lifetime, and it's that day, and you will never ever ever have the opportunity to get it back. So if anything does happen to your camera, I used to shoot weddings as well, and if anything does happen to your camera, you don't have an extra body, you are, I mean, it's the worst thing that can happen. So you know, you can't, as a wedding photographer, you can't really take that risk. Shooting properties, however, they're always there. So if something, you know, I mean, I haven't heard any horror stories for a long time, but if something were to happen, you can always go back to the property and shoot it. It's always going to be there. It's not a once in a lifetime opportunity. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Okay, would your post-processing team value us using X-Rite color checker passport to create reference white balance shot? Yeah, potentially. I'm not really going to say yes or no on that. Yeah, they will do sort of, if the white balance is off, they will sort of do their own correction. So I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately. Is it worth taking a reflector to hold behind the flash to keep good white balance, for example, if the wall ceilings are a vivid color? Really good question. We're getting this a lot lately on these, especially the ceiling reflections and the flash and the color. I definitely wouldn't worry too much because that can always, you can always adjust the white balance. But we don't, just to sort of make your life as easy as possible, and just to be really clear on what our requirements are. Of course, you can bring any extra equipment to a shoot that you need to, but in our experience and in our advice, we always advise just the flash gun attached to your camera as the source of external light. So we do not require you to bring anything else, no reflectors, you know, no second source of light, nothing like that. Of course you can if you really want to, but you know, we want you to sort of not be quick. That's not the right thing to say, but we want you to sort of be really aware of time constraints as well. So yeah. You can adjust image size en masse in Lightroom. I'm not sure what question that, if that's a question, but yes, you can adjust image size en masse in Lightroom. I have a crop frame camera with a crop factor of 1.6 and a Sigma 10 to 20 mil lens. Is that okay? Yes, Trudy, it is okay for a crop frame. You just have to leave your focal length at 10 millimeters, please. So yeah, in terms of the sort of shutter speed and exposure, so this is something that's adjustable, obviously, on your camera from shoot to shoot, and even from image to image and room to room. So the exposure, you should be using the light meter on your camera. You can also use a separate light meter if you need to, but I don't think that's necessary. And again, it's not an equipment that's required. So just using the light meter on your camera is absolutely fine, and you just adjust the exposure for each image. And so for the shutter speed, you know, generally in property photography, they do tend to go lower on the shutter speed, but that's not necessarily always the case, and it is going to affect your flash use as well. So the shutter speed, again, is something that is interchangeable depending on the light that you have in the room. If you are using a slower shutter speed, it's just one of the many reasons why we need to be using a tripod. So yeah. Okay, thanks so much for hosting all these sessions. They've been fantastic. Oh, thank you. I don't know who said that because you're anonymous, but thank you so much for your comments. And yeah, thank you for joining. So I'm going to just send you guys the remaining schedule for the month. Let me just load this up. Cool. So this is the remaining schedule. On next week, we have site visit process, Matterport 360, and customer service. These are all at 10 a.m. You will be getting the links as well, just really similar. It'll be the same session as this, so I'll do a brief presentation and then follow it up with a Q&A. So yeah, Monday at 10 a.m. is the next one, so I hope to see you guys there. We'll just sort of be discussing the site visit process and, you know, what to expect when you're there and the things to do and whatnot. Yeah, so it's been really great. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely day. And yeah, if I haven't answered your question today, then yes, please save it for the next workshop, and I'll see you guys on Monday.